Hi everyone, welcome to another issue, or episode rather, of 5 Common Objections to a Stateless Society with Dave from Seeds of Liberty podcast. Today I'm joined with two fellow voluntarists, Aaron and Don, Donnie, whatever you want to call him. If you guys want to introduce yourselves, Aaron.
Yeah, I'm Aaron. Apologize for not having a webcam, but I'm gonna fix that. I was a police officer for 6 years. I know, don't stone me. I totally denounce it now. And I was in the military for 10 years. Did a tour overseas in Iraq, unfortunately. But and I consider myself an anarcho-capitalist. Definitely want a free society with rules that I can agree with.
Don't we all?
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow, man. Don, go ahead.
Donnie, I did 6 in the Navy, 11 in the Army, a couple more in the National Guard. Learned better through 2 tours in Iraq. You know, I got injured and had to do a desk job as being an analyst, and that made me start thinking and start questioning and start seeing both sides instead of just the one side, and just kind of learned better over the years that we're kind of brought up in a bullshit thing, and if you keep believing in it, it doesn't get any better. So there's no changing it from the inside. There's no it's broke and you can't fix it. You have to start over.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. You know, it's like when I talk to the limited government, you know, the guys say that we just need to get back to our founding principles, and I'm like, that slavery was good. Like what founding principle?
Whiskey tax.
Yeah, yeah.
Whiskey tax rebellion, or
like. Yeah, but it's. I mean, we could obviously talk about that for hours, but you know, it's like I think it is time to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one. The government has proven time and time again to fail. Fiat has proven time and time again to fail, and you know, war really solves nothing. Just increases an empire or a protection racket's boundaries. But here we go. First question. We're going to send this over to Aaron first. Is the idea of private land, water, air a bad idea? Because that's a common thing. That's a common fear that especially a lot of liberals have that pops in their head. What if everyone owned all the water? They could just kill everybody on Earth. Just any thoughts you have about that, or anything you want to help clear up?
You know, I love the idea that you just said that they're going to have a Mad Max kind of lifestyle when it comes to private land, water, and air. Of course, it's not bad. I mean, the government's the one that uses force to enforce these ideals of land ownership and everything, and they can't even balance a checkbook, let alone control land, water, or air. I don't know why people are so worried about private individuals owning water. I mean, the fact that in some states it's illegal to collect rainwater. I mean, rainwater that hits my property that was probably evaporated from my property, to be honest. If we want to get into science, and I can't even collect it. That's bullshit. And I think private property ownership. I mean, if you can't have private property, then you don't own yourself. At the point that you say that you cannot have property, then you are basically giving yourself to a government or another individual. And I'm not a slave. Well, unfortunately, I guess I am a slave because I live in America, and we're all slaves to government, or we have to face the consequences, and we're fighting against that. But yeah, I mean, without private land and all those things you mentioned, or basically any private resources, then we are just slaves to humanity.
Yeah, the air thing is the hardest thing for me personally conceptualize. So that's one thing that I mean, how do you privatize? Like at what altitude? I mean, it's one of those we have to concede that either the market will find a way, or
well, it's like that guy that just landed the gyrocopter on the Capitol. You heard about that? Where the guy, he told the government he was going to do it, and then he did it, and now he's arrested. He didn't. What crime did he? I mean, what victim crime did he commit? I mean, who was hurt during that? I mean, he literally just flew and landed a plane. You
Well,
know?
he flew in NASA's airspace. That's you can't hunt the king's deers, you know.
Oh, that's exactly what it is.
Uh, I mean, there's a lot of people out around that area. I mean, he could have crashed that gyrocopter and killed someone. Could have. So, I mean, I understand. Like, if you could, I mean, at what point above your land, if you own land, does it become? Could you sell that airspace? I mean, there's a lot of things that, you know, a lot of people say, okay, the government can fix this by just saying we own the air and we control it, and you have no say in it because that's let daddy fix it. That's essentially their argument. Is there anything you'd like to add to this, Donnie?
I mean, if you try to get back to Lockean property rights, and you just have to look at it in the sense of who's homesteaded it, nobody really can own the air. About all you can really do is coordinate who's going to use it, at what altitude, and it's a huge, huge sky. So trying to claim that we literally own the sky is lunacy. It's sheer lunacy. You have no idea how many aircraft can be in the air at this. Like, we cannot mine enough metal, turn it into airplanes, put all the airplanes in the air at the same time, and they still have like 3 miles of clearance on all sides to just do whatever the hell they want. So
Yeah.
it's a really asinine idea.
Yeah. I agree mostly. You know, the thing I like to say is I like to propose the question. You know, okay, so we're on an island, and someone builds a house at the top of the river, dams it off from the rest of the people, and wants to hold a racket on the water. There's always an easy way. There's always an easy way to fix that issue. You could either say, this is ridiculous, you need to stop this, you're messing with nature. Or you could buy the water from him, because he put the effort into, you know, putting stuff and collecting it, and he's going to try to manage it correctly. You know, but if he's up there doing it for nefarious means, then yeah, you go up there and shut him down because he's aggressing upon everyone else.
And ostracism works wonders. You're going to have
yeah.
something that he needs.
Oh yeah. Like,
Right.
if he's gonna need food, he's gonna need shelter, he's gonna need carpentry, he's gonna need plumbing, etc., etc. He's gonna need those things, and if everybody's like, no, not until you remove that water problem.
Well, and I think it's fascinating how people think that, you know, when they hear the word anarchy, it's this big thing, it's big taboo. There's a lawless society. You can still have laws and still have an anarchist society. You know,
You can have rules. I don't know about laws.
Well,
Laws are.
when I say laws, I mean rules. You know,
Okay.
rules that you can agree with.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like, people think. I mean, we could go into hours about
Oh,
that, but you know, it's one of those things where, you know, the question, how would you prove that it's private land if there's no arbitration there? Like, okay, I mean, obviously there could be voluntary land. Could be like Consumer Reports or something. Like, hey, this family has owned this land since 1800. We've got it documented. You know, like stuff like that. And you know, if they were lying, they would get shut down. So there's always a peaceful way to fix a problem, and that's, I guess, the best way to drive any of our ideas home. Is instead of it being violence, there's always a peaceful way. So that's about it for that question. If you have any other questions or anything, do your research. Ask me. I mean, come up with a scenario. I'll answer it on Facebook, whatnot, or Twitter, or our YouTube comments. Next question's going straight to Donnie first. But we need a safety net. We need minimum wage. We need people to pay their fair share.
Well, let's just stop at the first word with we. Yeah, you might be my neighbor, but that's about it. So let's not pretend we share a bed and a bank account. And so when you're talking about we, keep it to yourself. And that is the inherent problem, is that the vast majority of people who are not interested in these things are more than interested and capable of handling their own business by themselves. Not to say that they're not going to have any interaction with another human on the face of the earth. It doesn't mean that I won't have insurance. It doesn't mean that I won't have car insurance, homeowners and car and all of these other things that are wise, intelligent decisions to have. It just means that stop planning with what you're going to do with my resources. Because the vast majority of people who claim that they even have a remote clue about this barely have a grasp at basic math. They don't understand the higher concepts of what property is. They don't understand how to manage it. They don't understand that they can't manage it because a market has billions of data points, whereas any central point cannot even come close to scratching the surface of having the amount of data points needed to allocate the resources properly. There's a Nobel Prize. If you can answer how do you properly allocate resources in absence of price, there's a Nobel Prize in it for you.
Mises
couldn't figure it out. Hayek couldn't figure it out. I got news for you. You ain't going to do it either. The price mechanism exists for a reason, and people like to drag that into a pejorative, anti-capitalistic, and because of this, a lot of the arguments are just a foundational argument for authoritarian centralization, which they don't make any sense.
Yeah, they want daddy to fix it, right?
Well, the arguments don't make any sense, but they have a belief that daddy will fix it. And, well, look at what a bang-up job they've done so far.
The whole, rarely does the phrase is communism is not for the communist. It's, that's hardly anyone you'll ever see advocating for communism, which most of those ideas right there that I said are communism or socialism in some form. Rarely do you have that person saying, I need a safety net. I want minimum wage. Right. I will pay my fair share. Right. And it's always we, the collective, because this is what's good for everybody. We need to force the greedy people to share. We need to force everyone to help prop up society. We need to force business owners to pay their people what the collective agrees as a fair share. So I think it's just communist drivel that's been beat into people's heads, Aaron, that I don't think that they realize that they're openly advocating for communism.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll touch on minimum wage real quick. The fact that it's the government's business how much I make. What if I want to work for $3 an hour? What if I went to school to be a lawyer, and I need experience? Every job you apply for, you need experience now. Well, I don't have that experience, but what if this law office can hire me to do for $3 an hour? They can't pay me nothing because that's against the law, this law that the government created. Or if I want to volunteer, I should be able to work for what I want to work for. Nobody forces anybody to work. It's like people think they're entitled for people to give them jobs. They think that, well, so-and-so owns this bakery, and by God, they need to hire me because I deserve this job. No, it's their business. They pay the bills ultimately, and they should be able to negotiate a price with their employer and their employee. And if raising the minimum wage works on an economic standpoint, then why not raise it to $100 an hour or $500 an hour? It's ludicrous to think that raising the minimum wage doesn't have consequences. And people are like, well, Walmart can afford to do it, or McDonald's can afford to raise the minimum wage. Well, you know what? They want the minimum wage law because then it puts their competitors that are small businesses out of business. You have Debbie's bookstore on the corner of Main Street or whatever in small town USA. They can't afford to pay anybody above. They could barely afford to pay a minimum wage, let alone anything else. And now throwing mandatory health care on top of it that they have to supply. It's just getting ridiculous. And I agree with Don. It's definitely it's not we. It needs to be I. I'm only pay my fair share. I'm responsible for me and my family. That's all I'm responsible in my heart. I don't need to take care of Joe Blow on the corner.
Yeah. I agree. If you're one of those people saying we, why don't you put your money where your mouth is and go do something? That's what I always say to them. Why don't you go help set up a safety net? Why don't you go build a soup kitchen? Why don't you hire people at a rate that you consider to be fair? Why don't you donate to a charity or a whatnot that you would consider to be your fair share? Like, why would you want to inject government force into the situation and make it worse? what is it that for every dollar? Like, all right. So if you give $1 to the Social Security office, right? I think 16 cents of it actually goes to the Social Security because of all the bureaucracy. You got to pay someone to collect that money. You got to pay someone to manage that person's payroll. Then you got to pay the healthcare department of that. So it's that $1 is like pointless.
It's like that scene from Office Space. What do you do here?
I'm good with people.
The cheapest way to get any good or service is directly, and there are some very small exceptions to that, like economies of scale, where somebody's buying so many that they can get a cheaper rate on the shipping and stuff like that. But the minute you have insurance, you just put a middleman between you and your doctor, and chances are the doctor will charge you less in cash than he will charge an insurance company, and a lot of people don't understand that.
Well, and let's be honest. I mean, people are greedy. I mean, the government can pay an infinite amount of money. I mean, all they have to do is print money. So if I'm a doctor and I'm like, Joe Blow over here can only give me $100 for this, but the government's going to give me $500. I'm going to charge this insurance company $500. Government creates corruption. I mean, it does. That's why people think that we have capitalism. We don't have capitalism. We live in a corporatist society, and it's caused by the government.
There's no such thing as greed, but there is such thing as envy.
Right,
greed
exactly.
is just a subjective value of how you think somebody else should spend their money. But
Exactly.
envy is I want a piece.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't believe in greed anymore.
A lot of people that advocate for the minimum wage don't. To add to this, they don't really realize what the minimum wage was created for. If you look at all the nations that first instituted a minimum wage before it became kind of a global phenomenon, they were used to keep minorities in those countries unemployed. And a lot of people don't realize that. Just for America, for instance, one of FDR's Democratic congressmen snuck it kind of into the Fair Wages Act, Fair Wages and Compensation Act of 1940 something or 39. I can't remember exactly what the date was, but the guy was an ex-KKK member. He was a staunch racist, and the idea was if we have a factory that employs 20 people and they're all getting paid $3 an hour, if we bump that minimum wage up to $4 an hour, are you going to hire white people at $4 an hour, or are you going to hire black people? Especially if the black people are coming saying, "I'll work for $2.50." No, you're not. You're not going to pay black people the same amount. You have to think about the power structures as well. Back then, black people didn't own the factories back then. There might be a few factories that are owned by blacks now, but I mean, if you had a furniture factory, 99.99999% of the time it was owned by a white person. And since people are dumb and collectivists through racism, they're not going to hire. Minimum wage is simply a ploy on people's racism, and a lot of people don't realize they don't see that as what it was. And it may not be that now, but that's what it was. It was just another way to keep the man to keep you down.
And I think, go ahead, Don.
Not only are they ignorant of what's going on, in that perspective, but they're ignorant about just the totality of it. The unions love the minimum wage for just that reason, but they only advertised that overseas during apartheid in South Africa. They wanted the minimum wage because it was keeping blacks out of the workforce. That was their whole thing, and they advertised it. They were proud as hell about it. So people don't really. Everybody looks, in the empire. There's a whole world outside of the empire that Americans don't look at. They only look at their own backyard.
They don't want to look at it.
Yep, because it doesn't make sense to them. And they don't, so they just wish it into the cornfield, and then they don't have to worry about it anymore, and it's not real.
Wave the flag and bury your head.
And I honestly think that the minimum wage is kind of taking focus off of where the blame needs to be. I mean, it's government-caused inflation. So the government wants to say, oh, well, we need to raise minimum wage to bring up people to a living wage, when the fact that we're not at a living wage is a direct result of taxation, to let alone the Federal Reserve and their ridiculous interest.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, our last podcast, by the time this comes out, our other podcasts will be released, and we did a whole episode on money, especially fiat money. And we broke down some stuff that really showed what the Federal Reserve has done to money, and et cetera, et cetera. But those are all communist pillars as well. That every one of those 3 points that are usually put up against a stateless society. What about the poor people? That's essentially the core of the argument. What about the poor people? And it's like, there were poor people before, all this stuff was put in America. There's poor people right now. Doesn't fix them. Ever since the government declared war on poverty, more people have become impoverished. So, the joke is, if government wanted everyone to become super intelligent, they'd wage war on education, right? So,
Yeah, it's getting out of hand.
So
it's another empire issue, because globally in 1900, 1 out of every 2 people lived on $1.25 a day, and now it's 1 out of 7. So in 100 years, we've removed from 50% of the population of the Earth to about 12% of the population of the Earth. That's a huge jump.
Yeah, and that's in spite of that's in spite of government.
Yep.
All right, so we're gonna roll on to our next question. Aaron, you got point on this one. How would we have art, music, research and development, medicine, or innovation without intellectual property laws?
Oh, you mean the same way that we had it before we had intellectual property laws?
Right? I mean, is there anything you want to break down about that? I mean, just the art, music, R&D, that's all kind of silly.
I mean, it is, especially nowadays. I mean, all music sounds the same to me anyways. I'm an 80 rock hair metal guy. So the music nowadays I can't even get into. Well, let's touch on intellectual property real quick. Can we imagine if the government was involved during the Wright brothers when they made their airplane? We would probably still be flying biplanes. The fact that people took from that intellectual property and improved on it, I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with people improving on technology. And say that a person comes out with we'll use a cell phone, for example. They come out with this thing and someone directly copies them, then that's where you get into the market. The market will take care of those problems. People are going to realize that these people are copycats and that's what they do. Or if they can do it cheaper, then they do it cheaper. I think honestly it creates competition. If someone's going to steal your idea, then that's going to make you that much better to keep up with it. And let the market punish it. We don't need civil penalties. We don't need you stealing money from me because I downloaded music off the internet or downloaded a movie off the internet. It's getting beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I think about it like this. Intellectual property laws allow monopolization on an idea or a product or whatnot. I mean, you take, for instance, like heart valves right now, like all of it is patented and trademarked and all that. Could you imagine if all that was open source and not just a company or two had access to it?
And
we probably would be ripping babies' hearts out and putting in a fake heart because it'll last forever. So it just doesn't make much sense to me that you would want to monopolize an idea just to protect corporate interests, and that's all that's for. Corporations are completely propped up by the government in one way, shape, form, or fashion. The question I like to pose to other people is, name one company that would get to its current size right now without either IP laws or government favoritism or whatnot, and you can't. You absolutely cannot. But the whole art, the music, the medicine is kind of one where, like it's the WD-40 thing. WD-40 has never patented their things because once you patent something, you have to list all your ingredients. Yeah, there's only one can of WD-40 on the shelf.
Yeah, and let's touch on medicine real quick. Why are we allowing medicine to be to have that stipulation on laws? I mean, medicine, if someone can come out with medicine cheaper than, or produce medication cheaper than it is now, then let's do it. I think that's the problem. I think that the government hurts that. The reason that we don't have a lot of cures for diseases that are going on right now is because the FDA. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, yeah, but you're also not looking at it through the eyes of a fascist.
Okay. Well, hold on. Let me put my fascist cap on real quick.
Yeah. You have to look at it because anyone that is opposed to intellectual property is a fascist. So, you have to look at it through their eyes and try to break it down for them, and they're not going to see that because they think, okay, company spends all this money, comes out with an idea and patents it. That's good because then they can make money off of it, right? Well, we all know the difference between something and its knockoff version. If you go to the store and buy Kellogg's Fruit Loops, and then you go right across the other side of the aisle and buy Fruit Circles, if they were named the same thing, if they were both named Fruit Loops, you would still know which one's better by the company that makes them.
Right.
So,
Oakley's is a fine example. You can go to Washington, D.C. and buy fake Oakleys all day long, but they're not as good a quality as the original.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
Don, anything?
The two things I would get into IP about is the methodology of how you have to enforce it, which it has to be violence. There's no way that you can just mentally project some sort of enforcement at somebody and stifle an idea. And then it's purely subjective because at what point do you stop? At some point, the theory of gravity can be owned. Calculus could be owned. We could be all having to pay into the Newton estate for the invention of calculus and gravity theories and shit like that. So at what point does an idea actually have ownership? And when you ask that, it's so ridiculous. You see it right off the bat.
Oh yeah, Stephen King proved that IP. He indirectly proved that IP laws are stupid as all hell because he wrote a few books under a pseudonym, under a different moniker, and they all hit the bestseller list.
Yep.
They didn't have his name on it.
Right.
It had some other name, and they all hit the bestseller list. Everybody was like, "Wow, this book is really good." So you gotta let people figure out what is shit and what is not, and intellectual property doesn't allow that. So I think it's just one of the pillars of corporatism, if you will, is intellectual property. The state's protecting those corporate interests because, all the like Pfizer, let's just do Pfizer. You know how much money the senators and all the lobby groups and all that get money from Pfizer just because of these property laws and these FDA rules and stuff. So it's just, to say that we wouldn't have intellectual or innovation without intellectual property is not a well thought out comment or objection at all, in my personal opinion.
Or the opposite of that.
Well, in my opinion, everything would be more efficient.
Of course, yeah.
Would be directly the opposite.
Oh yeah, stuff would be so when you can't have a monopoly on a pill for 10 years or however long it is, and 5 companies can make it, they're going to all push the price down.
Ma Bell had a monopoly, and nobody complained except for the people who tried to enter the market. And they got government to break up Ma Bell so that they could get a piece of the action because they couldn't run a business that well. So even when it does happen, it's not for the protection of the end user. It's for the protection of some guy who can't keep up but can afford a senator.
Oh, for sure, yeah, can afford to have the gun of government pointed at the direction they want. Next question, we're going to put it up to Donnie first. Now, this is a big one, all right? And this is a question that a lot of minarchists especially get completely hung up on. You can question a minarchist until they get to their backs on the wall and nothing's left but the cliff to fall down, and they still won't give up this thing. All right, and the question is, how would we stop foreign invasions?
The worst part about this is that it's the goddamn Americans who bitch the most. And they have one of the most choicest pieces of real estate to defend on Earth. It's ridiculous. You got an ocean on 2 sides. You've got
3
very small population.
The Gulf.
No. You have Atlantic and Pacific, and then to the north you got Canada, which is mostly frozen. So moving any kind of army through Canada is a real pain in the ass. It doesn't matter which time of the year you do it. Either you're dealing with winter or you're dealing with mud that'll swallow a heavy vehicle. Or Mexico, which is a relatively small border that's already in chaos. And most of that is due through drug policy, but either way, it's a relatively small. I mean, of all the people on Earth that can bitch about this, Americans are the least likely to have the actual problem and the most likely to raise the argument. And it's very easy to defend this place. It's very easy. And I'm digging more into the military side as opposed to the general overall question, but it's super easy to defend America. The first thing we have is an armed population greater than all of the standing armies on the face of the earth combined. We have the largest concentration of guns in the world, in the American population.
I mean, the Revolutionary War is the biggest example of this of all time. You know, the greatest army the world had ever seen, the greatest navy the world had ever seen, the British Navy and Army, got beat back by farmers and stuff with guns.
Right, right. And, you know, the people raised the World War II issue, you know, oh, but the Germans will come to America. The Germans couldn't cross the English Channel, but somehow they're going to cross the North Atlantic, right? Absolutely not. And then the Germans did get to America. And you know who let them here? The government. Operation Paperclip brought over all the scientists, all of the academics. Then they threw them in colleges so they could start teaching socialism and poison all of the people who just got done fighting a war. I mean, there are financial considerations, but in reality, we spend so much money on offense. We have a department of offense, not a department of defense. So if we were to just keep it to not marauding the planet, not funding bases all over the world, one of the best things that you can use to defend a landmass is a laser. And the first thing the goddamn Department of Offense did when they got a laser is they mounted it in a plane so they could fly it somewhere. I mean, Jesus Christ, these people have absolutely no interest in defense whatsoever. None. I'm getting worked up. It infuriates me.
I think at this point the DoD would prefer a direct attack from a flag nation on this country. I think that they would prefer it, especially the military-industrial complex. They, like, if someone, you know, bombed Florida or something, you know, they would be jumping in their seats for joy because that means more money for them and their stockholders. So yeah, I mean, but that we're talking about a stateless society majoritively, and you know, this whole we foreign those words don't translate into a stateless society. There is no borders on a stateless society. There's no we.
Well,
so
you still might have borders. You might have borders by the containment of the states around you. So
well,
it's
of
not
course.
necessarily there's no border between Texas and Oklahoma, but there might still be one between Mexico and Texas.
No, yeah, I understand that, but you know, it's this whole we thing. Like, if let's just say that there was no states and everyone just lived in the United States of America, right? or what the you know, like Prince, the artist formerly known as the United States of America, and Mexico tried to take over Texas. How many militiamen do you think you could get rounded up to fight back the evil Mexicans? I would say enough to squash any invasion.
They would be really tired of dying by the time they got to San Antonio.
For sure. So it's one of those
ridiculous.
Yeah, my thoughts on it is there's no way, once you have a completely armed populace that has no leaders and they all have protection of their own property in mind. I mean, if the greatest military in the entire world couldn't smoke out Al-Qaeda that they propped up in Afghanistan, then how could any that is the biggest David and Goliath match I've ever heard in my life. You could turn that entire country into a parking lot.
Right.
Yeah, but they got Bin Laden and then threw him in the water like a Decepticon.
Yeah.
Well, Bin Laden, you know, if they really wanted to keep stoking the flames, Bin Laden would have been took to America and shot on TV. Aaron, anything about how would we stop foreign invasions?
Well, you know, Donnie has the same argument I do about the structure of America, where we have natural defense borders. I mean, we could be Europe, which would suck to be a country in the middle of Europe, and I mean, history's proven that. But the fact that we are surrounded on 2.5 sides is I'm gonna break the barrier with water. So with the Atlantic, Pacific, and the Gulf of Mexico, and then you have Canada, which from a
Well, I mean,
status point
Alaska
of view,
as well. So
well,
the
we can forget about
the
Alaska.
Arctic Ocean. So technically,
Okay,
we're
all
going,
right.
and there's four. But, you know,
Well,
what
then
a-
you got Hawaii, right? So
Yeah.
we'll do mainland America for the purpose of saying America.
I'm just
No, I
pulling your
got you.
chain.
And then from a status point of view, we have Canada, which is one of our strongest allies from a status point of view. I'm speaking purely status right there. I mean, it's great. One argument that I do get from a lot of I don't know if it's from a lot of anarchists or voluntarianists, the fact that people only invade for tax purposes. I get that argument a lot. I don't agree with that. I think that you will have people that invade other areas just because they're evil. I mean, evil doesn't just magically disappear when you have a governmentless society.
Well, all right. So the reason that argument is brought forward is if you look at any big scale invasion, and the last really big one, not counting the way Iraq came into the Kuwaitis, is that who it was? And
when they invaded Kuwait.
Yeah, we're not talking about Kuwait, and we're not talking about Georgia and Ukraine with Russia, okay? But let's look at the last big successful land takeovers. Was Germany. All right, Germany. The reason they invaded Poland and Austria and all the other Balkans islands is to set up tax offices there. That was the first thing they did. Because when you're growing and building a military empire, you need tax money. All right, you need that money. You're a leech. Leeches die if they don't eat. So if you just build up a border and set up everybody on the border, you're not giving yourself that catalyst for that military expansion. And I'll give empires one concession, that if they don't expand, they die. And you look at Genghis Khan, you look at the Roman Empire, you look at the British Empire, you look at all these. If the minute they stop expanding, they die. So America is going to die because the plan of take over place, set up central bank is their fault. That's failing. These especially in the Muslim countries, they don't want a central bank there because debt and credit is against Islam.
Well, they're actually smart on that aspect with not wanting a central bank.
Yeah,
I can tell you that.
I mean, you look at the last two axis of evils in the world, Iran and North Korea. Guess which countries don't have central banks?
Well, I don't even know if North Korea has a bank. To be fair, they're
North Korea and Iran.
Right, yeah. But
Syria was the last one, but now they got one. So.
Even to your point, if you got all of them, eventually, you're absolutely right that the empires have to continue to expand. But what do you do once you have all of them? All right, the clock starts ticking on your death then anyway.
You won the game.
There's no boogeyman to fight. They're going to run out of.
That which mathematically cannot continue will not continue. So if your empire can't take in enough to expand the cost of violence, and violence is extremely expensive, if you can't take in enough to keep expanding, you're right, you're going to die. But even if you take it all, you still die. It still doesn't function because then all you have is a complete global state, and then you're not using fundamental economic principles to allocate resources.
Yeah,
Russian breadlines. Both.
Well, yeah. We were talking about that on the last episode of the podcast. What's the end game for the people who own the Federal Reserve? To crash every economy and get everybody on a one currency. That's the end game.
Right, but I don't think they haven't thought that one out. Like I said, once
I don't know. I think
it's
impossible.
They still run out.
I think it's too far in the future for them to even think about it.
I think it's quite possible, but the theory that they're running on that got them to this date is already starting to crumble. And they're thinking, okay, well, we have to seal the deal now because it's the only thing that's going to prop us up, when in reality, their end game has no end game. Without growth, Keynesianism dies.
Oh, for sure. Without endless wars, nation building dies.
Well, and the sad thing is when you want to expose the Federal Reserve or central banks for what they are, then you automatically get the tinfoil hat comments. They can't.
I think that was in the past, but I think more and more people are realizing they're seeing the smoke, so to say. Like me and you, we're at the door and we're looking in, and it's all ablaze. But the other people are like, "There's no fire over there, but there's some smoke up there. I see." And it's
Well, and you can thank the internet for that. I mean,
I think, yeah. I mean, Joe Biden had it correctly, or no, it wasn't Joe Biden. It was John Kerry the other day said the internet is making it increasingly hard to govern.
yeah, because they are liars and it exposes their lies. And the fact that they, with that net neutrality thing, I mean, that's just one step into controlling the internet. I mean, people don't realize it. They're like, oh, well, that's great. That's so great. No, it's not. It sucks.
Well,
And
I think it's yeah, government lags so far behind. I mean, we're still voting by going to a voting booth. Or I'm not voting, but people are still voting and going to the voting booth instead of texting it on their phone or something. So it's kind of dumb. So
When you're actual running 128-bit encryption and you're using the computer to count the machines, it is unlikely that you can poison all of the machines with some sort of nasty code. But you can have partisan politics counting those votes one at a time. One for you, one for me, one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me, one for you, one for me.
yeah. I mean, the lady that came out in Ohio the other day and said she voted 8 times for Obama. So like,
Yep.
and she worked for the electoral office. So
She knew exactly where she could get away with it.
yeah. To stop foreign invasions, you'd have to have a global stop of foreign or of central banking, in my opinion. Once people stop with the idea of a central bank, whether it's a privatized central bank or a federalized or a collectivized central bank, no good can come from it. You know, like the thing we said the other day on the podcast was, how many people would have agreed to go to the war just in Iraq? Let's not put all the whole war and terror into one. Just the war in Iraq cost every American, born, unborn, alive, whatnot, $75,000 in debt. If the IRS had to go to each door and said, "Hey, I need your kids, your wife, and your dog," we all need you to sign this contract saying that you're going to pay $75,000 of this Iraq war. How many people would have went to war? Not enough to fund that war. Guarantee you. 100% guarantee you.
well, and it's easy for people to send other people to war. They don't have to go, you know?
Which
I
I'm
mean-
sure both of you can relate.
Oh, yeah. I
There's,
mean,
there's a small amount of wisdom that says if you have to have a war, and we're not talking about funding or the legitimacy or anything like that. If you're dealing with legitimate aggressors, it's best to have the war at their house and not at your house. There's a little bit of legitimacy to that, but it's very difficult to ever end up in a situation where you've been aggressed upon and then have to go there.
Well, there's
Usually aggressors come to you. That's just kind of the nature of the beast.
Well, yeah, there's
So-
one thing Larkin Rose says, and I've never really been able to reconcile it, and it's one of the things I'd really like to talk to him about, is he says, okay, so big bad military, China comes in and invades U.S. after USA dissolves, all right? China comes in and they roll their tanks to the town, but no one will pay them taxes. They've either got to pull out, or they've got to. They're spinning their wheels. So, but I think he's thinking of that too literally, and not like realistically. In the fact that if China did invade and bring tanks to the ground, they would just start killing people wantonly, and then say, "Hey, we're in control. If you don't want to die."
exactly. That's what I was about to say. I mean, there's a way to force people to do anything you want, and I think people think non-aggression principle that there's not going to be anything like that, but there is.
No, but that's when the armed populace,
Right.
effect comes in. Like, okay, so they did aggress and say we're going to kill people till you start paying taxes. There's I know 100 hunters. I live in Alabama. They're
yeah.
everywhere. Like some Chinese tank driver's sitting on the top of his tank and he gets blasted from 500 yards away. I mean, just think about all the ex-military men that'll be around.
Well,
They're
that's
not gonna,
like,
they're not going to let somebody roll in. So it's one of those things where I think, it's obviously there's a lot more to the discussion than that about foreign invasions, but the whole we idea of it is, I mean, what do you have, a squirrel in your pocket? I mean, who is this, this fictionary we, because we implies a leader to control the collective essentially. So there's this idea that we would rise up and stop a foreign invasion is a false idea. I mean, you would have people willing to help protect their neighbors, but this, conscription and stuff and forming a government would, you're trading one master for another. It's an endless cycle.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the scenarios that these people come up with are really kind of fiction. Like I was saying before, you kind of have to wait for the aggressor to come to you. But once you do that, you seem to have an awful lot of support. People show up with money, people show up with guns, people show up with their lives in their hand, and they're ready to move forward. So there's no talk about a war. Oh, we have to go to war, and that war is a 17-hour plane ride. Nope. We have to go to war because it's here. That's a whole different message, and it's just so fundamentally different. China coming here, you have no idea the movement assets that it takes. China can't go anywhere. Don't fight with China in China, but China trying to move to Japan, just to Japan, would be a fucking nightmare.
Oh yeah, and Japan,
a logistical nightmare that UPS doesn't even want to try.
Well, Japan couldn't even. Japan almost took completely over China. They controlled 80% of China at one point. An island controlled 80% of China at one point because China tried to take over the Japanese island at one point, and they said no. And then once they depleted all their resources by attacking the island of Japan, put a counterattack on it, almost took them over. It really was the World War II that fucked them, so to say.
But the Japanese did that with a much smaller army. Their logistical assets to move that small army didn't have to be grand. And I mean, it's a big military. Well, there's the military side, and then there's an economic side. And
oh, of course, yeah. I mean, soldiers got to eat.
And now you have the U.S. government that's limiting the armies of Germany and Japan under the treaty. They're still doing that to
which is
day.
Unconstitutional. No American politician is allowed to sign any foreign treaty. So it's in the freaking Constitution.
I don't understand. I mean,
almost every treaty is a precursor for war. Washington, Jefferson, all of them knew that. So, but here's another point I'd like to make about this. Let's say America, the geographical location of America, had no state. That means there's no taxes. What Chinese corporation is not moving to America?
Not sure I understand the question.
What huge multi-billion-dollar conglomerate corporation
they're going to move here if there's no taxes?
Is not going to move.
We have the highest corporate tax rate.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
All right. So when all that business leaves China, they've got two options: either do the same fucking thing, or go bankrupt.
Well, there's the third option of you try to invade, and it's not always about the tax farmer. When Hitler went to Africa, he went to Africa because he needed resources to keep fighting a war. So there's plenty of resources on this landmass that kind of make it worth the while. But I perfectly agree with your point. But there are it's not simple binaries where if there's no tax farm to come and take over, then people don't come. It's not always that cut and dry. But I agree with the fundamental basis of the argument.
And I'm going to say we're and I can't believe I'm saying this. We're actually lucky in the sense of being an American because we're allowed to have guns. So many other countries aren't allowed to even have a gun. I mean, in England, you can't even have some knives. And it's only a matter of time before Europe's invaded again. But I mean, we are lucky, like Donnie said. We have the most, besides maybe Switzerland, we have the greatest natural protection, and maybe Australia. I mean, Australia is kind of hard to get to.
No, they're de-armed.
Well, they are, but I mean, as far as invading them would be difficult. But yeah, they're de-arming everything, and now their crime rate's going up because they de-armed it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you're breaking into a house without and there's no guns inside, and you have a gun. What are you scared of? I mean, just shoot everybody.
Exactly. They did the interviews in the prison with the people that were in there for robbery and stuff, and they were like, what was your number one concern? That I was going to get shot. I mean, think about how many people are stopped just from the thought of, I better not rob that guy because I may get shot. I mean, I carry everywhere I go. If you try to rob me, you're dead.
You better attack me from behind or know some Jet Li jiu-jitsu or something because you're going to get put a freaking hole in you. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Any closing statements on that one?
This is a 3-hour topic. we could do just this. I
Yeah.
could put together 50 PowerPoint slides on this. Like, you're wrong. That's all there is to it. I don't hate to say it. I lived in the Army. I lived in the Navy. I did intelligence. I do the logistical train. I played Red Horse. No. It doesn't come here. It's so hard to invade America. It's the only force that I know of that could dominate the landmass of the 48 states is the federal government. That's the only people who got the moxie. That's it.
And there's the argument that if the troops were defending freedom, they'd attack the government.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Yeah. Instead of dying for corporate interest, for sure.
Yeah, and like I said, it took me the longest time to realize that when I was in Iraq, it was bullshit. I mean, you just get this sense of patriotism and, oh yeah, I'm doing all this good stuff, and then you have to sit back and look at what you're over there for. I mean, the amount of money that we threw at those guys was ridiculous.
Oh, for sure, and you're not going to bring you can throw every conservative talking point at it. You can throw every liberal talking point at it, all right? It all doesn't make sense. There's no reason why they wanted a base there.
Yeah.
Wanted a base there to control oil interests there.
Oh, it's great if you want to do that.
Well, you have to. The dollar's going to collapse. If the petrodollar paradigm dies, the dollar's going to collapse. So you have to. Israel was no longer. If you guys don't know it, one of the most strategic points on the face of the earth is Israel. It's right next to the Suez Canal. It's the back door into Europe. It goes straight into, Russia, and you're right there in the Middle East. So it's one of those big points. It's almost as good as Hawaii. It's almost as good. And but Israel wasn't good enough anymore. We had to move closer. That threat had to be a little more closer to home for those people sitting on oil, because without that petrodollar paradigm, we would all be experiencing a different quality of life.
It's pretty much like a giant game of Risk.
Oh yeah, for sure. It definitely is. But for sure. But that's another thing we talked about the other day was, at what point does something come along that puts oil out of the business, and trading oil is kind of pointless. The reason why the dollar hasn't completely went into full-blown hyperinflation is because every OPEC nation is forced to trade in the petrodollar. So,
right.
Yeah, it's
China and Russia are setting up ways around that now. Iran stopped doing it a while ago. Syria stopped doing it a while ago. So there are starting to be the reason that we're not really full blown into China and Russia right now is because they'll also take dollars, but they are setting up ways to circumvent the petrodollar slowly, and I think that's a really wise move on their part, instead of making us desperate.
But all those nations are so evil, Donnie. They're so evil.
Oh yes.
The BRICS thing that you're talking about. Brazil, Russia, China, and Iran, I think. I have so many things to read. The BRICS are trying to make it their own currency, essentially, that they only trade oil in. And China and Russia need oil, and Russia is a huge. They supply pretty much all of Europe with the oil.
Yeah.
So but the big thing I like to tell American soldiers when I've kind of lost my cool is, you risk your life for Halliburton. You risk your life for American oil interests, not for 1 ounce of freedom. And it's one of those things where, yeah, that comes out of a rash thing, and that's not going to ever change anybody's mind, but it really puts the whole thing in one big nutshell for you. Like, that's it. You helped facilitate the propping up of more central banks.
When do you think the last war was fought for freedom? I mean, that's a good question. I would.
Civil War.
I would argue the War of 1812. I mean, they had the blockades on us, but the Civil War would be a good one. I mean, that was more of a internal conflict. But I meant from foreign invaders. What do you think would be the last war that was fought for true freedom?
Not World War II, because not World War II, not World War One. It would have to be the War of 1812, or the last time the British tried to come in.
I would say that's it, because even the Spanish-American War, that was all over land.
Yeah, that was all over the acquisition of land, for sure. But it's another thing where people are so blinded by nationalism that they think, oh, it's America. As long as we're safe here, it doesn't really matter what happens after that. There's two sides to every coin, is what I tell everybody. So, but
people, nationalism is the first part of National Socialist, and nobody was big fans of the Nazis. So
Well,
you
it's
might
not
not
even
want to
that.
get too
Like
deep into the national.
you know, the Romans were nationalists. The every country ever that sets up a controlling foundation, you know, you're either a patron to the king or a patron to the state. You know.
And you know what? I don't have a problem with all that if you voluntarily want to have that kind of government, but I don't voluntarily want to have that kind of government, so I shouldn't be subjected to those kind of rules.
It's a consent thing for sure. You know,
Right.
that's where I've been driving my message lately. It's a consent thing. I don't consent to this. What next?
Right. I mean, you can if you want communism and you consent to it, hey, that's your right. You know, as a person that was born on this earth.
Yeah, freedom
But
of
I don't
association.
want it. You can have it.
Yeah, for
Go
sure.
learn economics the hard way.
I just want to be left alone.
Yeah, the leave me alone party.
You know, I'm not gonna. Yeah, that's exactly what we should have that running, and then as soon as we get elected, we just eliminate the government. That's our first
You
executive.
know, it's pretty sad when democracy has failed so poorly and killed so many that the best president we could have would be a president that just goes to gets elected and does nothing. Does nothing. I refuse to do anything my whole term.
Well,
I'm
and
actually just going to sit at the house and watch TV. I'm going to do zero.
Well, and
Because that would let the markets kind of just stall for 4 years.
when I joke, everybody's saying the economy is getting better, but if you look at it, Congress has been in a stalemate for the longest time. They're not doing anything, which is good. It's good that they're not doing anything because then they don't have a chance to screw up anything.
Well, let's move on to our next question. But the whole how would we stop foreign invasions? How would you stop a foreign invasion? You know, it's we don't know yet. You know, it's almost every one of these questions can be put up against the who will pick the cotton if we can't rationally explain it. You know, like we don't know what's going to happen when we flip that rock over. You know, so next question. I think it's Aaron's turn first.
Yeah.
Okay, how would we stop pollution / deforestation?
Well, I personally don't try to pollute or cut down trees or anything like that. But as a collective society, education and innovation. I mean, educate people that it's wrong and what it's doing. You know, don't put restrictions. I think a lot of the restrictions that are put into place are preventing us from coming up with cleaner burning fuels. I don't think anybody wants to pollute or anybody wants to cut down all the trees. It's a necessity right now for what we have. I mean, we need oil. I mean, oil is what we need right now. And what we need to do is find another alternative energy source, and that's not going to be the government. That's something we have to do as a collective society. So I think through innovation and education is how we would stop that in a society. When I say we, I mean I.
Yeah. I it's a tragedy of the commons point is what I like to put on. You know, if we privatize things, you know, if someone's polluting the area, you can sue them. You know, like let's say someone has a factory next to a neighborhood. The neighborhood could sue the factory, boycott them, or buy them out, one or the other. And there's always a peaceful solution to everything.
I mean, boycotting works wonders.
It does in some sense, as long as the government's not there to protect that business, for sure.
Or to bail them out.
Yeah, for sure.
The problem is we have bailouts. You know, there's no
don't even need
consequences
a
for
bailout.
having. Well, there's no consequences for having poor business ethics.
It's the foundational problem is it is government, but it's the LLC. Should
Right.
any human ever experience limited liability? No, you should always be liable for whatever you do. But the minute you create this privilege of limited liability where I can do whatever I want and I don't lose my house, you've taken that skin out of the game for these people. And that's where the real moral hazard starts.
Well-
Everything else after that is second and third and fourth order effects.
And that's the problem that we face right now is we have essentially two main parties. We have the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. Republican Party is a majority what they call capitalist, and the liberal side is a majority of people that are I call them the Occupy Wall Street, and they think that capitalism wants corporations. They don't. Capitalism doesn't want corporations. We want free trade. Capitalism, like Donnie said, gets rid of any consequences.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you have fascists on both sides. You know, someone got me or asked me to explain America's political system, and I said, for the rich and above in the political class, it's fascism. For everyone else, it's communism. And this whole pollution, deforestation, whatnot, if you let companies buy up forestry and protect it and set it up to be sustainable, it's going to be there forever. What happens when public owns a mine? When the public owns a mine, it gets shredded. It gets completely wiped out. When it's a privately owned mine, they mine due to market demand. So the mine's
Correct.
there a long time. So when the government says, yeah, all these loggers have free reign to do whatever with this forest, as long as they stay in these bounds, guess what? That forest is going to get ripped apart because there's no incentive for them to set up sustainable profits.
And the government wastes too much, and I'll touch on that real quick. I remember, and Donnie may remember, being in the Army, and you had well, I know you remember that, Donnie, but that you have a fiscal budget, and then at the end of the year, when they need the next budget, they have all this surplus, and they're like, well, we need to go out and buy shredders. We need to spend all this money so we get the same exact money that we had last year. So it's so much waste. So you want to talk about pollution problems and deforestation, that can exist without the government. We can fix that problem through the private market.
You want to talk about the fundamental moral hazard of you must spend all of your money this year or you won't get any next year. Who would set up a system like that ever? Would you run your finances like this? Year to year, you have to
Corporations.
spend it all?
People that can just print money. I wish I had a money print machine.
Yeah,
Right.
like I ask people that say the corporations or the companies are the evil polluters in the world. I ask them, who's the largest polluter in the world then?
I'd say China.
And then they go, oh. And then I go, yeah, it's the Department of Defense, or as
Yeah,
Donnie's coined it, the Department of Offense of the United States of America. The United States Navy is the world's largest polluter in the entire planet. That's...
Well, and
and the Navy pollutes more than the top 5 privately owned companies below it. And we're talking about oil companies here.
oh yeah. Well, and luckily, and I say this, the best way I can, the Navy's trying to come up with alternative sources. Right now, they're experimenting with turning salt water into fuel, which would be awesome. They already have the nuclear reactors, which is better than diesel. But you're right. I mean, they want to preach, oh, well, this company needs to do this, restrict it. But how about you start with your internal workings? Don't preach to the choir.
Yeah, and a lot of communists don't realize that. The problem is never going to be solved by government. Government doesn't fix pollution or deforestation. The world's largest polluter is a product of government. So
It can only work in its own paradigm. It doesn't adopt new things easily, and it doesn't adopt them for a reason, and that's because it's generally paid to keep them the same way as they are.
yeah, for sure.
So, literally.
I mean, it has to keep growing. The Navy has to keep growing to prove its necessity. If we shrank the Navy down to 5% of what it is right now, withdrew all of our foreign bases and stuff, yeah, the pollution would go down, but then everyone would start catching on that maybe we don't need this big military. Maybe we don't. What if people collectively bought acres and millions of acres of land and said, look, no one's going to farm this land and we'll kill you?
That would be the federal government. They own a majority of the land in the United States.
I still think, well, they own all the land through eminent domain, but yeah.
What I mean is they have so much government land that is basically just sitting there.
Well, most of it's desert.
Well, I'm fine with that. Put some solar panels up there.
Yeah, but the way we stop pollution and deforestation is through innovation.
Right.
Getting rid of IP laws, getting rid of governments that are wasteful and inefficient at what they're supposed to be doing, which is protecting people and assets, and they never do that. They're always a racket. There's not much else we can say about the whole pollution and deforestation. And Google tragedy of the commons. That'll put everything into complete perspective for you if you want to understand the libertarian, voluntarist, anarcho-capitalist point of view on the thing. So, is there any final comments you guys want to throw out there? We're kind of hitting 1 hour and 4 minutes. Aaron, Donnie, you want to say anything about any?
I'll go way outside the box on that last one because my wife was. I told her this last night. She's like, well, what about an oil spill and yada yada yada? Who's going to clean it up? And I started explaining, this is what could happen. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but just to give you the outside of the box, down in the Gulf, they had a pipe. The Gulf oil spill was basically they broke something and they couldn't repair it at the depth they were at and stuff like that, and they had to actually have new equipment made to cap it correctly. And I told her, you know what? I bet you they would have done a lot better to just go purchase a 5 kiloton warhead and detonate it in 2,500 feet of seawater. It's not going to hurt a human. There's not going to be all this excessive radiation. Yeah, you're going to melt some fish. It is what it is. But better than let that oil well pump oil, a couple thousand gallons of oil or it was hundreds of thousands. It was about 100,000 a day or something like that. Barrels of oil every single day. You light off a 5 kiloton nuke, you will melt everything. You will seal that well. The whole thing's taken care of. And she's just like, I don't know how far outside the box I'm comfortable with you going, but just in a world where what can we, everybody says there's no use for nukes. I got news for you. A 5 kiloton warhead in 3,000 feet of water is a beautiful thing to stop an oil well. Sounds crazy, but people tend to really think of these inside the box solutions.
I don't know about all that, Donnie. That sounds. I think that there's there was
badass, Donnie.
I think that they were trying to.
I know how to break stuff. I'm really good at breaking stuff.
I think that they were trying to save face, that corporation, and if the money that BP lost was completely hedged against oil interest and stuff, so they're still here. If that happened to a private company without government protection, that company would have went bankrupt.
They would have been done.
They would.
And I'm telling you, if I was the CEO of a company, I'd have bought a 5 kiloton warhead, and I'd have had to take care of it 3 days, and I'd have had that whole thing cleaned up before it ever hit shore.
And then PETA would be knocking on your door for killing the fish.
Right.
And radiating the water and etc. Like,
it's not nearly what you think.
There's not
the
a big
nukes and radiation thing.
There's not a big that one's a rough one to talk about because I'm sure I could find a way that government caused that problem. I'm sure I
don't
could.
think we need to. I don't think all roads don't need to lead to government. I think the general principles of how to handle a problem need to focus around a methodology. And then all you really have to do is point that government uses the opposite of a decent, peaceful, voluntary methodology to get anything done. It doesn't matter what it is. So I don't sit around trying to point all roads point to government. I just, how can we fix this problem? How does one go about fixing the problem with no constraints, like a 5 kiloton warhead? There's people living in Hiroshima right now. There are people eating sushi in Hiroshima right now. Don't worry about the 5 kilotons into 3,000 feet of water. I'm telling you.
Well,
but it sounds great.
I think it eventually got fixed the best way they could. I mean, obviously, oil companies need to not be so protected by governments that they need to be really spending way, way, way more money on protecting their interest, essentially, and compensating people for the mineral lost on that private land and stuff. Because if that's probably a tragedy of the commons issue right there as well. I guarantee you, if BP owned that oil well and owned that that oil rig or whatever it was, whatever the terminology is for it, I'm sure it would be maintained a little bit better than them just, hey, we threw up an oil rig, we're sucking all the oil out as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. So
I thought it was their rig.
I think it is their rig, but obviously, I think the Department of Resources or whatever it's called controls that. BLM, maybe land management. I don't know. It was in American coastal waters.
Oh, right. I'm just saying that the reason that whole thing became a shit show is because, one, they couldn't handle it quickly. So because they just didn't technologically have the ability to cap that well quickly, then now there are second and third order effects of oil hitting the coastline, shrimp people not being able to shrimp and get their livelihoods out of the ocean anymore, and they already knew before they even bothered to drill that well, they knew that the government was going to protect them and limit their liability. They have to stay in certain guidelines, and as long as they stay in the guidelines and they paid good money to have those guidelines written in their favor, then it would only cost them X amount of money, even if it did go to shit. So when you're working with that level of debauched concepts of how things are going to function and not run amok, you're so far down the rabbit hole, it's almost impossible to look at the situation and think of it sane.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah. Any closing arguments, Aaron?
No, I think surprisingly we all agree on pretty much everything we talked about. I think that, and I agree with Donnie, that not all roads do lead to government. They're not the problems that cause everything, but the way that they handle the problems is kind of oxymoronish, if that's a real word. They don't actually fix the problem. I mean, the government doesn't really exist. They're people. They're people just like us. I mean, they don't build the roads. They don't do all that stuff. They may take our money and be the middleman, like the Office Space guy, but. Yeah, I think that things need to change, and hopefully they will in my lifetime.
Yeah, I view government as a mafia. Essentially, they force you to fund them, and then when there's a problem, they shoot guns at it. That's their only answer is violence. If you look at any time the government tries to fix an issue, it's always with violence. And what we're saying on all of these points is there's always a voluntary, consensual, and peaceful way that you can handle everything.
Even if it involves 5 kilotons.
Even if it involves nuclear armament.
And actually, I will touch on that because I meant to touch on it earlier, is people want to preach the non-aggression principle, and they don't realize that self-defense is not aggression. You know, self-defense is necessary to, I mean, you're always going to have violence. I mean, whether it's the government or someone else, you're always going to have violence, and self-defense is necessary. So when people hear non-aggression principle, they think immediately that, oh, well, self-defense. And I know, Dave, you know who Cal is. He does a great job when he does these forums that he asks him. He goes, besides self-defense, do you use violence to solve day-to-day problems? And it's great. Because people can't say, well, yeah, I do use violence besides consensual. I mean, boxing's consensual, so or
it's about initiatory violence,
right? And it's great because nobody can come up with a reason, and then they still justify government.
I mean, yeah, there's a reason why in school if someone walks up and punches you in the face and then you whoop their ass, they get suspended, not you. Or they
you
get
do
expelled.
now, though. They have the zero tolerance policy, which is dumb. It takes out common sense out of everything.
Well, yeah, because mommy and daddy are going to protect us.
Well, that and the public schools want to have you respect authority. I love hearing that. You need to respect my authority. Well, I didn't give you that authority to respect.
Yeah, my girlfriend told me that she learned in college the other day, one of her psych classes, that men with beards have a propensity to hate authority.
Well, I can't grow a beard, and I still hate authority. So
I've had a beard since I was 16, and I'm almost 28. So
nice.
It's been.
How's about the chop?
We'll give you a pass. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching this. If you want to add any questions to our list, we're gonna keep doing this as long as we got questions. I'm gonna keep doing this with different guests, different hosts, whatnot. If you want to answer or tear apart anything we said, feel free to. I'll make sure Donnie, myself, Aaron will be there to respond to you some way. Next week we're going to do 5 more questions and 5 more questions after that, and we're going to keep this train going until we answer every question. Which I don't know if that's a possibility, but you know, it's there's a meme that goes around, and it's this guy with a huge book, and he's got the first page open, and it's like, what will happen in anarchy if X happens? So we're just gonna keep tearing that apart. If it takes us 10 years, we'll do it. But thank you so much for watching. You can follow Donnie at Don_Gebert. Aaron's gonna be making him a Twitter account soon. They might be possibly starting up a I don't know what we're going to do with it. Ex-military, ex-police podcast. That's the idea. And check us out at the Seeds of Liberty on Twitter, Seeds of Liberty podcast on YouTube, and theseedsofliberty.com. Everyone have a good evening. Signing off.